Hello, and welcome to the Heal Your Heart, Heal Your Life podcast, the podcast where we talk all things we've survived through, whether that be trauma, life lessons, and most importantly, how we've healed. In the hopes that if there's a listener out there somewhere going through the same thing and they're feeling lost on what they can do to heal their hearts, they can come to this podcast to hear inspiring stories from people who've lived through what they're going through. You are seen, you are heard, and you are loved here. So today's episode will be a solo cast with yours truly, Kiara Jade. For those who this might be their first episode or you don't know me, I am a couples therapist, a relationship and self-worth coach. I am a author, a speaker, a healer, and my mission is to be able to help humanity learn to love themselves and learn to love each other, and heal themselves from their karmic wounding that's holding them back from being in the most divine timeline, helpful, healing, joyful, peaceful, loving relationships that they can possibly be in. Today's episode is going to be about self-love and my journey to self-love, which has been a long time coming. I have always struggled with self-love from a young age. And I think there's a lot of different pillars that come into self-love that we may discuss today. And I think it's just such an important topic. I think this is the basis of my work in relationships. I think everyone comes to me because they're having relationship problems. They don't realize why they're having relationship problems. And I think a lot of the root cause of a lot of issues is a lack of self-love on both sides, both parties' sides. We're working from wounding a lot of the time. We're not working from love. We're working from fear. And unfortunately, that is not serving us. It's not getting us to where we want to be in our relationships. So, yeah, I hope that by sharing my story, this kind of gives you a bit more of a guide of where to go next with your journey of self-love. I think everyone talks about self-love. You need to love yourself more. You need to do more for yourself. And I think no one fully understands what that concept actually means. Generally, in society, people, I think, see self-love as a form of self-care, like I'm just going to go have a bath later and that's going to be my self-love for the day. And don't get me wrong, like having a bath is a wonderful thing to do to just indulge and be in devotion of self. But I think there's so many more tenets of self-love that can be done. And even though self-devotion, I would say, is definitely one part of the full picture and definitely allowing the time for that, I think it's a lot more broad than that. And the emotional aspect to that is often not taken into account. I mean, sometimes it might be if you're journaling or something, but I feel like we're still very in the physical when we think about things and not necessarily in the emotional. And I guess that's where my perspective comes in because I know the emotional from being a sensitive Pisces baby myself. This is who I am. A lot of what I teach is what I've already embodied or working through. I don't like to teach things I don't fully comprehend or understand or get on that level because I don't like to ask people to do things like love themselves unless I've already tried to do that. Self-love is an enduring journey. It's not something you're just going to get overnight. It is something that's going to continue being pieces and pieces dropping in across your journey. And that's okay. That's so fine. We want to be gentle with ourselves, as is the nature of self-love. You don't have to be perfect at it straight away. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to slip up at times. But I mean, as long as you're recognizing, that's going to be super helpful for you for next time around. So we're constantly learning and growing, and that's so okay. So a big part of self-love that I have learned, and that is one of my tenets of self-love, or my pillars. And I have spoken about this briefly, touched on it in other episodes, and I said I'd do an episode, but I haven't dedicated a whole episode to forgiveness. But that is something I wish to speak about now. Forgiveness has been a huge thing for me. So when I first heard about forgiveness, I immediately assumed it was forgiving the person who's wronged me.
And at first I was like, no, stuff that. I don't want to forgive that person. They hurt me. Screw them. And I mean, you have every right to feel that way. And you will come to forgiveness at your own time, at your own point. But stay with me, hear me out, because I think that, again, we're not looking at the bigger picture of forgiveness. We're looking at what we think forgiveness is and what we assume it should be. I went through something when I was younger, and I was like this beautiful person who believed that in the best in people. That was just who I was as a teenager. And I grew up with childhood sweetheart parents, right? They met at their first jobs at Coles and they fell in love, and they were together from when they were 16 till, unfortunately, my father passed away. But they would probably still be together if he was around now. So they were madly in love, and that was my template for the world. And so when I was 16, there was this part of me that was like, I'm going to meet my soulmate at Kmart where I work. And obviously that didn't happen. Bear with me. I'll get back to forgiveness. This is like all part of the story. And she, I just had so much hope, and I just believed in the best in people. And I thought everyone was like me, right? I was like, well, if I have good intentions and I go out into the world, other people will also have good. It's just an assumption. Other people will be thinking the same way I will be thinking. And so I had this relationship. It did not go well. And honestly, it was the basis for my entire career as a relationship coach, because it kind of taught me that not all people have my best interest at heart. And, sometimes we need to be aware of protecting ourselves. And anyway, so from that experience, I kind of ignored it for multiple years and then came back to it in my adult life. And I was like, oh, this is something I need to heal. This is a wound. It's affecting my life now. If you've heard my episode on going from fearing men to engaged to one, I would touch on this. But the piece that relates to forgiveness here is that that part of me that was the bright eyed, curious, excited, like just wanting to explore the world of relationships version of myself, after that experience of being hurt, I shut her down. I locked her away. She was not allowed to run the show anymore. So I don't know if you're familiar with parts work. Parts work is a big one coming out at the moment in terms of therapy, in terms of healing, family constellations. You can do your own research there. Essentially, the premise is that there's different parts of us that drive our ship, right? And a lot of the time we have our put together part of ourselves, our like intelligent, our smart, like our calm, our not showing emotions version of ourselves driving this ship. And then every now and then that part of us falls asleep, and there's another part of us that jumps in. So that could be our angry version of selves, that could be our sad version of selves. And so this innocent, beautiful, I would say pure version of myself, like very naive version of self. After that experience, I was like, you are not allowed to run this ship anymore. And I shamed and denied her, and I shut her down, and I locked her away, threw away the key, did not want to know about it anymore. And I became, due to trauma, this version of myself that was more defensive, that had to know about all the red flags, that had to like protect myself at all times, and did not trust anymore, which is so valid considering the experience. And anyway, so forgiveness. So when I was working on this wound, I didn't know really where to start. Someone was like, forgiveness is a good place to start. Or like I don't know if that's where you would start as your first step, but anyway. Um, and so I tried to forgive the person who hurt me, like mentally. I didn't physically go talk to them. I wasn't in a headspace to want to do that. But in my head, I visualized them. I said, I forgive you, once I was ready to do that, because that was a journey in itself. And let it go. And then I was like checking in with myself. Do I feel better now? Has this helped me? And I think the thing about forgiveness is it's not giving permission to that person to continue running around wounding people. Forgiving someone else is actually for yourself. Forgiving someone else is being like, I release this from being in the back of my subconscious mind anymore, and I don't want to know about it anymore. But I'll go into that on another episode. Anyway, I didn't really notice the difference. It didn't really help me feel like I was shifting anything in terms of my self love. If anything, I still didn't like that part of myself who was the naive part who did that. And I still was really rude and mean to her. I blamed her essentially for our trauma. Blamed him as well, but blamed her. And it was like a whole mindset shift when I realized the person I had to forgive that was really going to help me move through this trauma was not the person who hurt me, it was myself. I think we are so hard on ourselves inherently. When we make a mistake, our inner critic just jumps in there and blames. And it was like, you're too naive, you're too sweet, we need to shut you away. There was so much judgment there from myself to myself. No one ever said that to me. And the person I needed to forgive was that part of myself who made the mistake, who let that person in. All she did was let him in, who believed in the best, who didn't realize we were going to get hurt and just was being curious. And when I realized it was her the whole time I had to forgive, everything shifted. I was like, oh my God. Forgiveness, the idea of forgiveness itself shifted. It was like, wow, I never realized that there was this whole part of me that I hadn't forgiven. And I went in, I did a meditation where I forgave myself. And I gave her an apology for shutting her out and for not letting her run the ship anymore. And in that moment, I reclaimed a part of myself. There was that part of myself that was curious and joyful and happy and believed in the best of people. I let her back into the fold. That doesn't mean she was running the ship all the time, but she was allowed to have a place at the table. And this was like such an integral piece in my self-love journey and coming back to being like, you know what, we make a mistake, but it's okay. We can forgive ourselves for that mistake. We can see the gold in that mistake, which was it set us up for a life of wanting to be a relationship therapist, which is like our mission. It made us curious about the world in our own way. And yeah, it's terrible that it happens, but you know, we have other means to protect ourselves now. We don't have to shut her away. We have boundaries. We can protect ourselves. We know not to just let anyone in. So that was a huge core tenet of self-love for me. That was probably one of the first that I kind of stumbled across. Another core tenet I find is this inner critic that we have, this voice in our head that's constantly telling us we're not good enough. It's constantly telling us you are too this, too that, too ugly, too fat, too this, too that. We have so many negative belief systems that run our ship. And society doesn't help. There's always a new ad telling you you need this moisturizer, otherwise your skin's going to be too dry. You need this to look better. You need this. Marketing, advertising, all of that is not reaffirming that we are beautiful just the way we are. So there's a big piece around negative belief systems and how we think and feel about ourselves. Do we think we're a good person? Or are we utilizing those mistakes and that self-blame and that judgment that we've caused in the past? And are we, every time we make a mistake, coming back to that? Because if you haven't done that work, if you haven't self-forgiven yourself, those parts are going to come up hugely. There's going to be this big piece around like, how dare I let people in again? What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Blame, blame, blame. A lot of times you'll see people blame externally, but there's a lot of people out there who blame internally when things go wrong. And I think this is the part we want to love on. And this part is trying to protect us at the end of the day. If you made a mistake and, you know, everyone's judging you and like, oh, we have to say sorry and we have to do this because we did the wrong thing and you're trying to protect yourself. Somehow there's a message for you in that. However, that doesn't mean we need to prescribe to it. We don't need to agree with it. This is the part where I'm going to call you to action to challenge those thoughts instead of agree. And I feel like when we do agree too much with our negative thoughts, that's when we end up in these depression spirals of like, everything is the worst and nothing's going to get better and I'm stuck and it just kind of escalates. And so being mindful of our inner critic, how harsh we are on ourselves, and also how we work with our inner critic when it does come up. Obviously, it's a piece of you don't want to shut down and ignore. You want to listen to them, but you don't want to take that on board. You don't want to hold that moving forward. You want to be able to listen, take the parts you need, and then let go of the rest. And this is a lot easier said than done sometimes. And I don't know, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's a burn ceremony around let's release the parts of us that are being really hard on us right now. Let's throw it into the fire. Let's ask for help transmuting that into something different. Let's work on the judgment wound. What did that help me with when I was a child? If I judged myself so harshly, maybe then I aligned with a parent and I got my parents' love. Like, where has this come from and how was it serving us when we were little? And is it still serving us now that we're adults? Big questions. And whose voice is that? Is it our voice or is it coming from someone else that we knew when we were a child? So you want to be able to rebel against these thoughts a little bit. And a good way to test where you're at with this is to simply walk past a mirror and see what pops up. A mirror will often bring up a lot of our feelings about being not good enough if we don't like the way we look that day or something along those lines. You will probably be able to tap into your inner critic quite easily by doing that. So I almost feel like with self love, you have to go down the rabbit hole of how you don't love yourself first and excavate the wounds and look at your judgment wound, look at your shadow in order to help clear that. Because if you don't look at the wounds, you don't look at the shadow, which I know it's hard to do, it's like easier said than done, that's what's going to keep coming up in your inner critic, right? With all of this stuff, the deeper I went into the darkness, when I came out on that other side after going through it, was my depth into the light. So every time I clear another one of these pieces, every time I self forgave myself for something, my propensity for joy just grew. My propensity for good thoughts grew. Yeah, you can put all the affirmations on your wall and be like, I am the best, I am the greatest. But if you aren't excavating the wounds that hold you back from thinking and believing that that's true, you're not going to be able to embody it. I probably sound like a broken record on this, but a lot of my work comes back to inner child. A lot of our wounding comes back to inner child. We are honestly big adults running around with these inner children in us who are just working from their wounding. You never felt heard or seen at home. Maybe you're now the leader of a company because that way everyone hears and sees you on the daily. And maybe that's a subconscious thing that you don't even realize you've done, but we are programmed in childhood, and then that's what we become in adulthood to kind of fill those needs and those gaps. I have had multiple times where I feel like, oh, am I projecting my own wounding onto my boss right now because my boss is a male authority figure, and that reminds me subconsciously of my dad. There's weird shit like that that will come up. And so going back to the root cause is often really helpful to clear your entire timeline to this point, where we are then able to clear the pattern in today's day and age and how that is coming out in today's day and age. So, maybe someone in your workplace is really rude to you and it just triggers you because you're just like, how dare they be so rude to me? Like, I've done nothing wrong. I'm so lovely, da 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 da. And it's really important to trace that back to where that started from. because oftentimes it's more than just what happened in the workplace. It will link back to something that happened in the past. So, doing this kind of work with a therapist or a coach is very important. And honestly, one of the tenants as well is how much we look after ourselves when shit hits the fan. Make a mistake, someone's unhappy with you, you say something, there's conflict. I see a lot of people with fear of conflict because they don't know how to handle it when someone's coming at them. You're the worst, you're the this, you're the that, because they believe it themselves, right? And if you believe you're the worst and someone tells you you're the worst, you're just going to end up on this negative spiral, right? You're not going to be able to hold yourself in that. But how well we self soothe is so telling of how well we love ourselves. If you can accept that you make mistakes and it's okay, and that if that wasn't your intention, that's okay, and that even if people are coming at you like you're the worst person in the world, you can remember that you tried your best in that moment and that next time you will do better. That's going to shift things. But when we are so afraid of conflict or we are so afraid of how people respond to our boundaries that we can't handle the fallout of that because we just turn on ourselves, because that's what we always did in childhood. We just turned on ourselves. We must be the problem if our big person is telling us that we're the problem, even though they might be projecting their own wounds that have never been looked at. That way, we're not going to separate from the tribe and we're still going to receive love. So sometimes it's so much easier to just blame ourselves and take over responsibility for what's going on, because that way we're still included and we're still lovable and we're still part of it. But what happens in those scenarios is that you are ignoring your inner child who's saying, I didn't do anything wrong. Or your inner child who's saying, yeah, maybe I did make a mistake, but I didn't mean to hurt them. And they're telling me I'm like not loyal or I'm distrustful or whatever. And I'm like, my intention was not that. And I would love for them to know that that wasn't my intention. And that's what I would like to speak into the space. But when we have to accept fault and that we're wrong and they're right all the time, it just makes me feel really shit. And so, how well you deal with criticism and how well you soothe yourself when you are going through it is very big indicators of your level of self love. And you can trace this back and you can work on the wounds from there. Because self love is everything. If you love yourself, you're going to be more likely to go for promotions at work because you're going to believe, even if I don't have the proper qualifications for this, I will give it my best and I think I can handle it. I can handle when shit hits the fan, right? I can handle when people are asking me questions I don't know the answer to because I've dealt with my wound around feeling dumb or whatever it is. And if that triggers that, I can hold myself in that and I can keep myself safe. Whereas if you don't love yourself, you're going to be like, oh, no way I could do that. I don't deserve the money that's going to be paid for that. So I'm just always going to stay in this role instead. Let someone else do it. Or you're going to attract people who treat you like shit in relationships and you're always going to take over responsibility for that, whatever happens, blame yourself, take on responsibility for the conflict. Oh, if I fix myself, maybe it'll get better. And you're going to constantly be surrounded by people who don't recognize your worth and your value and expect you to fix it all the time, even when they have had a part to play in that conflict. Honestly, the more self love we work on within ourselves, we attract that into our reality. So, oftentimes, our wounding will be reflected back in the people we meet, into things that happen, because if we're not looking at it within ourselves, we almost need something in the external environment to make us actually notice it, and to it's almost like another opportunity for it to heal if it comes up in our external environment. So when you do have a wound around not feeling good enough, that means you're a vibrational match to deal with experiences where you feel like you're not good enough. Whereas when we're going in and healing that from the source, that means that you're going to see less of it in your external world. So that's why it's so important to be doing this work. And it's so hard to be doing this work. I want to acknowledge that to sit in your shadow and to look at your wounding and to see where you don't love yourself is not easy work, right? It's not a day in the park. It's not a bath. Not that there's anything wrong with a bath. We love baths. And therefore, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a lot of people aren't able to do it. The more you can look at your shadow and not run and not get defensive and not blame the world, because that's easier than looking at yourself, because there's a lot of shame in looking at what your part was to play, and there's so much shame there, and that's very triggering for a lot of people. But the more you can go into that, the more you can heal your heart, the more you can heal your life. But it takes a courageous warrior spirit to be able to reflect, self-reflect on what was my part to play in this piece and what was theirs. And what can I take away and go, okay, maybe I was a little judgmental here. Maybe I escalated into emotion here because there was a big trigger or wound around this. And how can I work on myself so that when that inevitably happens again, I don't escalate into that level of emotion where I can no longer actually work with what's going on in front of me. Then it becomes working about, when we escalate too far into conflict and emotion, it becomes about like de-escalating that instead of about the actual problem. So this is a journey, like I said, and it's so okay to get the help and support you need through this. You might not know where to start with healing your judgment wound or something like that, and that's so okay. Go get the support and help you need when you need it. But also know you are just as capable of holding yourself and loving yourself as a coach or as anyone else is. And maybe you start with the coach or the person who can reflect back that unconditional love to you. And then it gets to a point where you can give yourself that unconditional love when you're self soothing, and that you can remind yourself that you are a worthwhile person and that your intentions are usually good, even if you stuff up every now and then. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing your best, if you're working on your wounds, if you're going to therapy, if you're doing the work, it's like, what more can we ask of you? I think always starting with the intention that I do no harm, do as little harm as humanly possible. If I'm going out into the world and I'm wanting to help people, I'm not wanting to harm them. And I'm willing to look at my shadow to make sure that that doesn't happen. You're already a step ahead of the game. You're already challenging the status quo. This is a rebellion, right? Everything we've been told has just taught us to shut down and not feel any emotion and not go into those wounds and just shut them out, shut them out. But what we know is that doesn't work. And so you're rebelling against the system to love yourself, because it means you're not able to be controlled by your wounding anymore. It means you're going to attract high quality partners into your life who love you as much as you love you, which is going to change the game. This is the path to sacred union. When you can heal from a breakup and you can integrate the lessons and you can grow to be the next version of you, you're going to attract someone who meets you at that new place that you're at, not the place where you started before that relationship. And the more you do this shadow work, the more you're just going to become a higher vibration. And that is going to call more higher vibration people into you, where it's easier to have harmony and it's not as difficult to manage conflict. There's always going to be some level of conflict, even in the best relationships you've ever seen. There's always going to be something that comes up. We're not clones of each other. There's always going to be some belief system that pops in that we don't align with. But what it is going to be is it's going to be less of a challenge to actually have those hard conversations, because you're going to be met with someone who has done their own work, who can sit with the dark emotions of the shadow because they've sat with their own shadow and they're not scared of it. They're not running away from it. They'll be able to meet you and give you that unconditional love in it because you can give that to yourself. And you're not going to need that from them either because you can sit with your own emotions and love yourself through it. And therefore, you're not begging them to fix it anymore. It's like, yeah, it's great if my partner comes in and supports me through this, but I know I have my own back if I absolutely need to. And that makes it way less desperate and clingy and like, I need you to fix me. I need you to help. I'm freaking out right now. It's like, it would be great if you could help. But if you don't have capacity for that, I can look after myself. And this is where people are more inclined to give you that help and support because it's less of a, a clinging desire. And they've done the work, so they're less afraid of it. You're not too much anymore. So, doing this work and being on this self love journey will affect every area of your life. And I hope, I hope that you're courageous enough to step onto this journey and be able to move forward in how much you love yourself. And if you are interested in knowing more, if any of this has really resonated with you, I am running a workshop at the beautiful Center of You in Prahran on February 15th. So, Valentine's Day, not exactly, but the next day. If you want to come and love on yourself this Valentine's Day, why not come along to my workshop? And we're going to talk about these tenants again. We're going to actually do embodied somatic, mostly meditations, but also other things, to check in with those parts of ourselves, to get some guidance around what our next steps are with self love, and we're going to heal. So, if that sounds of interest to you, if that's calling you, I would love to invite you to be with me in that. You are so welcome. All right. Much love, family.